Okay, perfect. Eric, so it's great to have you here. I've been a long admirer of your work over the years, and it's a pleasure to finally sit down and have a conversation around all things body composition.
Gosh, I'm happy to be here, man. Same thing. I mean, we've been talking about doing this for a while. I'm glad that we're able to sit down and collaborate and put this together.
Awesome. So recently you put an article about body recomposition. Now, body recomposition's always been thought of as that elusive sort of goal for people to accomplish. Just what is body recomposition, and what are the realities of it for the everyday busy professional who is looking to get in shape, build muscle, lose body fat, and how does that process work?
Yeah, so the recomposition process is all about being able to build muscle and lose body fat, but doing so within the same training cycle. So before we jump into that conversation, I think what's really important to understand is for the vast majority of people, most people come in, they say they want to build muscle and lose body fat. The fastest route for most people is to go towards one of those goals individually.
Yeah.
And many times that there is a recomposition effect that takes place when going all in, if you get all these other variables, training, nutrition, sleep, recovery, mindset, all dialed in correctly. But for the person who is purely has the patience looking to do a recomposition, yeah, this can be one of the best things that you do, because a recomposition is more or less a very slow, gradual cut in terms of body fat while you're slowly adding lean muscle mass. And when you approach a body recomposition, recomposing your physique, you need to enter with the mindset of understanding that this is going to be a longer process to be able to see significant physical changes compared to what you would if you're going to go all in towards a cut for the next 12 weeks or all in towards building muscle for the next 16 weeks. Because a recomposition, what it entails is optimizing what you're doing nutritionally with a lot more focus on more advanced strategies, as I'm sure you know, in terms of meal timing, and being able to focus on building lean muscle when that anabolic signal is the heaviest from your resistance training, while also being able to understand when energy demands are a little bit less and making clean food choices to be able to lose body fat.
Okay. And where do you see these situations happening in the real world versus, because I think over the years it's been used in marketing quite heavily as build muscle, lose body fat, achieve it all in 12 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Ride two horses and get it all. Where does it actually happen, and when does it not happen in a day-to-day scenario?
Yeah, great question. So first, people who are getting started, who maybe haven't been very dialed in with their training and nutrition before, are almost automatically going to have a recomposition effect if they follow a good program and a sound nutrition protocol. And what actually happens for many people is they actually see a recomposition where they're getting leaner and building muscle the first time that they train. And their expectation is that that's the way that training is going to continue going forever. Normally not the case, but it is important to note that you will have, with a recomposition in the very first phases of your training, yes, it is very likely for you to happen if you are a beginner or somebody who hasn't been dialed in, maybe with the correct training variables and nutrition that you had in the past. Another example would be somebody who is potentially on, anabolics. Let's address that elephant in the room. Obviously, if you're going to have chemical assistance, your body's going to be in a much better place to be able to build muscle and lose body fat. But then one of the most important things that is often missing for people is synergy. And by synergy, what I mean is having your training, your nutrition, and your lifestyle all functioning together at the same time. And the vast majority of people who are interested in health and in fitness will do very well in one or two of these areas, but very rarely all three. And let me give you a quick example, right? We've all seen the person who lifts really hard, their nutrition is dialed in, and their lifestyle is great Monday through Friday. Friday night comes, Saturday comes, and they're off. And I like to take my clients to this activity and say, all right, so 5 out of 7, what is that? About 71%. All right, so if you had a 71% in school, what grade would you get? And the answer is a C minus, below average. And what I always like to frame is, are you putting in a C minus type of focus and expecting an A or B type result? And when we go through this activity, the key element is understanding that, you can be working very hard in many of these different areas, but after you've reached kind of that beginner stage and start to become more intermediate or advanced, trainee, no matter how busy you are, when you start to get that lifestyle aspect dialed in or get everything working together, your results are going to be amplified 10x. And most lifters go their entire career without really understanding that component. And then they go through and they try every different training type, every different nutrition protocol, and all these different stress management techniques without addressing the elephant in the room. And that is getting everything to work together all at once.
Yeah, I've always found it really incredible to see when someone does dial those three things in, and then they go through this real cool period where their body weight doesn't really change, but you can see their physique completely changing in front of them. And
Yeah.
it's hard for people to get their head around it, especially because their goal is probably something to do with a six pack, and yet their scale isn't really moving. So it's like, oh, am I doing things correctly? But then when you look at their pictures, you look at their waist measures, those things are changing in the right way, and they've just gone through this cool honeymoon phase of dialing everything in nicely together and getting results they never thought they expected.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned a couple incredible things there, and one of them being getting their sleep and getting their recovery and all those dialed in. From what I see, at least 80% of people who at least come through our coaching program, the thing that's holding them back isn't their effort in the gym or even their effort necessarily nutrition. It comes around to stress management, which prevents most people with stress being uncontrolled. They fall into a habit of self-sabotage, whether it be with their diet or lifestyle or inconsistency in the gym, and then getting sleep optimized. And, getting some of these other skills in areas of fitness that don't get as much attention as the coolest new training program or this advanced nutrition protocol, getting dialed in makes everything else work together so much better. And then you start to notice these things, right? You start to notice, even if the scale isn't changing, maybe a little bit more vascularity in the mirror, or you take a waist measurement and it's going down, but your weight is staying the same. These are all really good core indicators of a recomposition. And if your waist size is going down and your clothes are fitting better, but the scale isn't moving, you're losing body fat. You're successfully having a recomp. But it takes actually measuring these different areas and paying attention to them to really notice that it's happening. And in my experience, a lot of people are actually getting a recomp if they're going through a sound program, but because they're not measuring any other way of progress beyond what they're seeing on the scale, they end up changing courses and changing gears before they really give the program time to maximally work.
Yeah, I think stress management is one of those things where if you don't have your stress management dialed in, it always shows up in most cases probably food, especially in the audience that we're probably speaking to right now, is where when stress isn't managed, using food to suppress that, especially in the evenings after a hard day's work, to take the edge off, it can end up spiraling all the results that they want, and sometimes even unconsciously, without even realizing, because they haven't developed that awareness of their day-to-day eating habits. So you may just be going through your day on autopilot, but because you're stressed at work or whatever it may be, you just pick at things, and it's become such a decade-long habit of yours that you're trying to break this, but because it's just there.
Yeah,
You end up sabotaging your own gains because you haven't got a handle of that core stress mechanism.
definitely. It's like if you are not actively managing stress is actively running you. And the case that you mentioned, yeah, you get through a work day and you go through it and you instinctively maybe have a cocktail, right? Or maybe it's something where you put the kids to bed and pretty soon, you're elbow deep in a bag of chips. And it's something that just happens as a reactive stress response. And, when stress is unmanaged for people, it's not even a conscious thing in most cases. We start just to fall into these habits or fall in these behaviors or reaching for something, the candy jar that's on the desk at work, just instinctively out of habit, versus it actually being a proactive decision, right? And what stress management allows us to do is pull out of that reactive state and really focus on being proactive with the decisions that we're making and having present state awareness. And gradually, this improvement in present state awareness allows us to do all the things that we know we should be doing and that we know how to do. And many times that's what makes a big difference in terms of that body composition, when it feels like you're doing everything right, maybe in the gym and in the kitchen.
So what are some of your favorite stress management strategies for the everyday busy professional who's juggling multiple priorities with family, work, and then trying to also somehow get the physique of their dreams?
Yeah, definitely. Hey, it is a lot to manage. We definitely empathize with that. And I think the biggest thing first is to look at what is causing you stress. And is it something that you can control? For example, are you constantly tuned into the media and maybe things that are going on there, and that changes your reactive state? Are you, spending time with people who tend to drag you down and don't necessarily support the healthy, active lifestyle that you want? And again, none of these are easy choices, but they're choices nonetheless. If there are different stressors that we can actually change within our day, many times removing a point of stress is the most important thing we can do to manage stress. But beyond that, if we want day-to-day, healthy activities that we can do, one of the most important things that I find is a gratitude journal. I use a 5-minute journal where I write down 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things that would make today great. And then at the end of the day, I review them. 3 things that went well and 3 things that I can do the next day to make the day improve. That's one option. Another one would be a simple, 5-minute meditation. I like to peel up on this couch right behind me. I'll throw on Calm or Headspace and just do a 5-minute meditation once in the morning and then once at 3 p.m. because personally, I notice my stress, if you're putting in a long work day, tends to ratchet up towards later in the afternoon. And that can be something huge for you as well. One final component, especially if you were a hard charging person, really getting after it in multiple different areas of your life, really look at your intake of stimulants, caffeine, coffee, whatever you're having there. And for many people, what they'll do is they'll use caffeine and stimulants to ratchet up their brain to get a lot done. But throughout the day, they don't really taper off. And pretty soon what happens is you start to burn through that energy that you have. You're left with the stimulant. And what happens in most cases? Well, you're edgy. You're anxious. Maybe you have that, maybe you're a little bit harsh when you get home at the end of the day and you notice that I can't quite unwind and be with the family or be with the people that help me decompress. And so in many cases, I've found that pulling back on caffeine intake is absolutely a game changer for so many people when it comes to stress and anxiety.
Caffeine's a massive one, especially for, corporates and entrepreneurs and anyone who's really like in a high performance role. I actually recently, about 4 weeks ago, I decided to go cold turkey on caffeine. I realized I've always historically for many years delayed my breakfast at about 12 p.m. But I was finding that in order to get more and more work done, I was having another coffee and then delaying my first meal. And in the end, I was getting to like 2, 3 p.m. and I hadn't even eaten. And I thought to myself, this isn't healthy. And then I happened to have a random conversation with my mom, and she said to me, her skin's been really clear recently. I said, "Oh, what have you done for it?" She's like, "Oh, I've just stopped caffeine the last few weeks." And I thought, oh, not to say that caffeine's it causes skin issues, but me and her have very similar reactions to our skin. I thought, that's interesting. I've had a recent outbreak over here. Let me give this a shot. Just give it a shot tomorrow. And I dropped it on the Monday. I was completely floored for the first 2 days. Couldn't do anything. Couldn't function at all. But ever since then, I felt really clean energy. I've been sleeping better. I've had more stable energy in the day, and I've not had the highs and lows. And now I haven't actually had a coffee for 4 weeks now. And it's not to say it's not to say I won't go back on it, but it's more, I don't feel like I have that reliance, because what was happening was I was waking up and it was almost an habitual that I'd wake up, make a coffee, continue after 2 hours, another coffee. And next thing you know, you've had a couple of coffees, especially when you make them at home, they can be really strong. It just causes uncontrolled caffeine intake, which will impact your stress levels. I really like also what you said around the meditation at 3 p.m. And the reason why is not because of the meditation, but the almost of the stop in the middle of the afternoon to almost cut the fat of the day, because you can get so like head down to the grindstone nonstop, go all the way to the end of the day without even stopping. And then I think that 3 p.m. meditation, I'd be really curious to know like how you feel in that moment, because you're probably a little bit similar to me in that if you're not, there's an element of work addiction in place, right?
Totally.
And always being on the go. How did you implement that? And how do you feel when you do that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's definitely been a big change for me. I like to get up early and then just go until the wheels fall off. That's the way that I tend to work, right? That's just my mindset. And for me, I've always noticed that I do my best creative work and some of the most important things in my business early on in the day. And as it goes, as the day gets further and further, that creative edge starts to get dull. And as that happens, right, a lot of times if I do not take breaks throughout the day, which again, I tend just to go heads down and pile drive through it, by the time I get to 3, my brain's pretty shot anyway. Like I can get some work done, but it's not really high quality work. I might be checking things off my to-do list. I might be doing some admin tasks. But what I've found is taking a little bit of time and just giving myself that headspace to decompress and just focus internally on something as simple as my breath for 5 minutes, it re-energizes me. It gets that creative flow going. It lets me hit higher brain states, and it lets me do it without feeling like I need more and more caffeine or being in a reactive state later in the day. So yeah, for me, it took a little bit of time to get used to. I have an alarm that goes off on my phone as a reminder each day to get calm at 3. And it's made a big difference though, and it serves as a way to help me not feel like I'm just spinning my wheels, trying to get more done for the sake of getting done, but instead make sure that what I'm focusing on is getting 100% of my attention, and I'm only focusing on the high value tasks that I can do specifically. And I think like that mindset approach, prevents you from getting that scattered kind of monkey mind that can happen later in the day when you maybe finish up with your work day and you're like, oh shit, I've still got this to do, this to do, this to do, this to do. And then you carry that stress with you all night, and it probably impacts your sleep.
Yeah, it probably impacts your food choices, impacts the way you spend your time with your family, and then that vicious cycle just sort of repeats itself and brings us back to what we spoke about with that triangle fusion of training, lifestyle, and nutrition falling off sync again and compromising on your results.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that ties back into one of the most important things with recomposition. Recomposition is such a powerful thing if you can do it correctly, and many people can if they get this recovery part of it really dialed in. Because beyond that, right, you can look at all the training, all the nutrition stuff in the world, but until you fix the underlying issues that lead to better recovery, it's not necessarily going to lead to the changes that you want.
Yeah, I was telling a colleague this morning, I was saying, like, most people, the reason why they struggle after they've dieted and after they've got their dream physique, and they don't have that deadline anymore of, I'm going to hit this beach body or whatever, is after they've done that, the reason they struggle is now they're suddenly exposed to all their issues. And if you think most people if they become overweight and they become obese, they probably got there by some element of disordered eating or some element of binging. They just haven't identified it as that. They're just eating steady 4K calories a day or 5K calories a day whilst without moving. Whereas when you now strip it back on the other side, you're suddenly now exposed to all the stresses that you haven't dealt with. And that's where what you've mentioned becomes really, really important, because if you don't deal with it, you end up binging, restricting, and again spinning your wheels and probably reverting back to square one. And the idea of actually sitting with your stressors and feeling them through and understanding and resolving them, which is obviously the hard work, becomes the next stage of this journey.
Definitely. And it's not always the sexy work either, right? We all, especially if you're a hard charger, you want to push the diet, you want to push the training. And these are important things. But without the recovery piece, most advanced training nutrition protocols, they're going to fall flat eventually.
Let's switch gears to advanced training protocols and discuss some cool plateau busting strategies. Because many people will go to the gym, and I think we're both of the opinion that program hopping doesn't get you anywhere. But at some point, every program has its cycle. Milk programs, not. When we do get to that point where, okay, a slight tweak needs to be made, or we've hit a plateau in our strength gains, we don't need to necessarily change the overall program. What are some of your favorite strategies to break through?
Yeah, so one of the most important concepts that I think we should talk about is what we call micro progressions. So a micro progression is a very slight alteration to an exercise technique without changing the exercise per se. So let's talk about a squat. Let's say your legs are a little bit stagnant. Well, let's say you typically have about a shoulder width squat and your toes are straight forward. Well, if we want to change the response a little bit, we can widen that stance, externally rotate your toes just a little bit more, and all of a sudden we're shifting more of that weight directly to your glutes, to your hips, to your hamstrings, to your lower back. And it's enough of a progression where it keeps it from getting stale, but not enough of a change where it completely disrupts what we're going for. Or another option would be we can narrow your stance a little bit, add a different tempo, slow it down, elevate your heels. And now we're really going to focus directly on your quads. So where most people would see a program and say, hey, I need to completely change this, I'm going to take squats out. A much better option is many times to make a very slight progression in terms of your technique, where you can continue drilling that same key movement pattern that's been proven to be effective how many thousands of times, and do so in a way where it's going to help you optimize body composition without taking too many steps back and completely disrupting, the underlying mechanisms at play for optimizing body composition. So that would be one other example. Now, if we want to look maybe at something specific for a strength movement, and then we can get into muscle, but let's use that same example of a squat. Okay, so if you're doing a squat, but you always get stuck at the same position, we have what's called a sticking point. And if we want to get better at the squat, what we need to do is actually power through that sticking point. So let's say that sticking point for you is at 90 degrees, or so right around parallel, right? Well, instead of going through a typical squat and just trying to hammer the same weight, same things over and over again, what we can start to do is we can start to overload the movement pattern right around that joint angle from which you get stuck, right? So we can do a bottoms up squat from the rack. Great, that can be a great way to build strength. Or if we have an example of a bench press, let's say you get stuck off your chest, Awesome. Well, we can start to work just as a press from an overload from the bottom, or we can even do, if you're struggling with your lockout at your triceps, you can do a board press or a floor press, something along those lines. But the underlying thing to understand here is, if we train a particular movement at the specific joint angle from which you get stuck, we can build strength around that sticking point, which will allow you to bust through that plateau. When you can break through that plateau, lift same weight for more reps or heavier weight for more reps, work capacity is increased, the amount of tension you can put on a muscle increases, and voila, you have a better muscle building exercise.
Do you like to keep the main lift within the program, and then build these accessory lifts as accessory lifts, like the board press, floor press, etc.? Or do you prefer running mesocycles where you pull the bench press out for a bit, use the other exercises as key lifts?
I like to keep the key components directly in there, and if we need to attack, a specific weak point, then we can do it before and or after that key lift. The biggest problem I see with many people is they change variation too much and they never actually get good at the training specific component, right? And so what happens if you're constantly changing exercises, you might feel the novelty of a new exercise or a new routine and feel some new soreness, or you might be excited and a little bit more motivated. But what happens is, if you change those programs too much, anytime that a program that's actually well designed is put together, there's what we call super compensation. So on the back end, if you complete a full program, your body's still gaining. So let's say I finished a program last week and now I'm during like a transition period. My body's still adapting to the stress that we put it under, right? And so if we cut programs short or change exercises too quickly, we're not going to get that aspect of the recovery and the growth. And a lot of people do that, and it prevents them from, really taking advantage of completing complete programs. In addition, if you don't get strong enough on an exercise, or you're constantly changing where you can't mentally connect, you don't have a great mind muscle connection. I think of something like a Romanian deadlift where people struggle to even feel their hamstrings on occasion. Well, you're really going to struggle to make that exercise grow. So while it might sound boring to keep doing the same exercises over and over again, very slight adjustments in tempo, timing, foot position, hand position, if we're talking upper body, can be all the stimulus that you need to create a novel response inside your body without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so if you do that by keeping that key lift and then programming some of the other variables around it, that's what can get you unstuck.
Have you had good success with instead of changing the exercises or altering it, slight tweaks, adjusting reps and rep ranges, and implementing recycling of the rep ranges where so if you're doing 4 to 6, you may be doing 6 to 8, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that can be, another great way to create those progressions. Sometimes what we need is, some people are a little bit more fast twitch where they do really well with low reps. Some people are a little bit more slow twitch where they do better with high reps. But on occasion, it can be both a mental change and a physiological change where it's like you can turn the strength that you've built with a low rep scheme into a greater work capacity when you increase the reps. And that in itself can lend itself back to improving strength, performance, and muscle within a different rep scheme if you're looking to do so. So yeah, varying rep schemes, even changing rest periods and pushing those things a little bit harder can be crucial for you too. And if we want to get really advanced, stuff like mid-rep pauses, right? If you add pauses on your eccentric, if you want to take yourself for a ride, do in your next squat workout, take a 3-second pause halfway down, then finish the eccentric and then come back up. And you're going to find a whole new way to create tension in your muscles that you weren't having before, which is really going to help you break through some plateaus.
Amazing. You mentioned these were more specific to strength. What about for muscle building?
Yeah, so for building muscle, right, it's always going to be a little bit different. And a lot of it is going to depend on your previous training history. So I tend to work with a lot of people who are also former athletes. And as athletes, many people are conditioned to focus more on the movement than the muscle. So instead of thinking about engaging your chest on a bench press, you're just going to say, I'm going to throw as much weight on there as I can, execute it with good technique, but focus on pushing the weight. Whereas building muscle, your focus is going to be more, I want to be able to flex my pecs to initiate this movement. I want to make sure that my triceps are pushing to be able to lock out at the very top. And so this is a very subtle difference in terms of how you mentally approach your exercises. And in order to improve this mind-muscle connection and to be able to get over these plateaus when it comes to building muscle, here are a few things that I like to do. Number one, I like to do preset primers. So a preset primer would be something where, let's use a bench press in building your chest as an example. Let's say you want to build your chest, so you got a bench press, but you normally only feel your shoulders and your triceps. So one example of what we could do is we could do some preset flexing. So I'm just sitting here. It could be as simple as cross my arms and flexing my pecs, so I get that mind muscle connection. Or it could be as simple as going through doing 2 or 3 sets of, say, a cable chest fly, and really feeling all those muscle fibers contract. And by priming your body to feel these muscles before you get going, this can be a huge benefit in terms of actually recruiting that muscle on a particular exercise. In the short term, there might be a slight decrease in performance because there can be some pre-fatigue, but consider that an investment in being able to build a stubborn muscle group more effectively.
I like it. How about nutrition? How do you play around with nutrition when it comes to muscle mass increases? Because I completely agree that most people just can't flex the muscle, assuming that they can train hard, which I think not for athletes. I think athletes, you probably don't have that problem with, in that they train probably too hard. But for the general population, the first trick is just to get them training hard. Once you assume that with good technique and mind muscle connection, what is your approach with nutrition? Is it quite boring? Just keep it in a calorie deficit, surplus, or do you get experimental with it?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it depends on the mental makeup of the person, and kind of come back to this question we're phrasing before, right? Where it's like you can be really good 5 out of 7 days and then fall off. And this is even more of a problem when it comes to building muscle than it is for fat loss for most people, where they'll eat maybe at a calorie surplus a couple of days a week, but not enough consistently because people want to stay lean and build muscle at the same time. The recovery process doesn't just end magically at 24 hours, right? Like when you have a workout. So it's not like eat at a surplus on the days that you train and then like eat at a deficit the next day to lose body fat, because you're just going to spin your wheels. So what I like to do is actually start very simple. I like to start with a recall. Let's find out how much you're eating right there. And then we can simply start to stack a couple habits on top of each other to be able to get that. So 10 to 15% calorie surplus for most people is enough to start building lean muscle. So if you sent me your diet, one very simple way that I would do would be, cool, let's say we've got to add another 300 calories per day. And what we're going to do to get that, we're going to add a banana before train, or banana after training with a protein shake. And an hour before you eat before you train, you're going to have half a scoop of protein with a cup of oatmeal. Like that's enough for most people to build muscle if they just add that on top of what they're already doing. So I like to start at a very basic level like that. Like, let's lock in consistent meals and times. And now here's this one thing that we need to change. Because sometimes I find if we give somebody very specific macros and advanced meal timing techniques and all this, it can work really well for the short term, but it's not something practical and sustainable. So if I can lock in some consistent habits on the front end and they prove that they can do those, then we start diving into the more advanced tactics that can really move the needle from there. Otherwise, it's something that works in the short term. But for me, if something works in the short term, that's great. But I'm after a long-term sustainable change. I want my clients to not only get great results now, but be able to have the tools to be able to keep them long-term. So that's my way of trying to ingrain these new habits. They're going to help them keep the muscle that they build before we add on more of the advanced, maybe nutrient timing techniques.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of long-term results and people that actually get results, what have you noticed to be the commonalities in those, from a mindset perspective, in those who achieve long-term transformation results?
Yeah, so you're making me think back to one of my clients right now. He's been with me for 13 years at this point. First was an in-person
13
client.
years.
13 years. Yep.
Oh wow, that's impressive.
And he's a guy successful in many different areas. He owns his own energy company now. And when I started training him, he had a family. He was in grad school and lived 45 minutes away. I was driving in the city, trained 3 days a week, 6 a.m., did not miss a workout except for the occasional snowstorm. And that mindset for him was, this is as important as any other meeting in the day. And I think that's important to understand because, with him, he specifically told me on multiple occasions that, like, if I don't do this for me right now, there's no way I'm going to be able to with all the other demands of my schedule. And when you can start treating your health with that same responsibility that you would with a meeting, maybe with your boss, amazing things can happen. And so, like, that's the first thing. You create a non-negotiable meeting directly with yourself. Number 2, when things aren't perfect, you don't stop completely, you adapt. And I mean, I'll look at my wife, as a quick example here. So, she's somebody who pushes hard, and she's actually battling a little bit of a foot injury right now while she's in marathon training. But, instead of completely stopping everything that she was doing, 2 days ago, I just saw her, she's training out in our home gym. And then yesterday, she hates biking, but she found the equivalent of her protocol for what she needed to do running. She hit 60 miles on a bike. right?
Wow.
And so it's being able, and not saying anybody has to do anything, to that extent, but it's having this mindset of like, cool, maybe I can't do exactly what I had planned, but I'm still going to make progress regardless. So this could be, okay, you go to a hotel gym because you're traveling and you don't have all the equipment that you need. You don't completely scrap the workout. Maybe you pick the same movement patterns that you would have in that regular workout and you get through with what you can. Or you can't commit a full hour to that training program, you commit 20 minutes or whatever you can for that day. Because gradually, when you start to hit all these small things consistently, that's really where success builds long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that mindset of I'll do whatever I can do is definitely the one that differentiates those who succeed and fail, because life is always going to be in the way. Life is meant to be in the way. If you're going to wait for the clearing of when you don't have any travel plans, you don't have any social plans, and your calendar has decided to say, oh, for this year you can
Not
focus
coming.
entirely on your health and fitness, you're going to be waiting for a very, very long time. And I think having that non-negotiable mindset of your core habits is the difference between success and failure.
100%. It's being able to be adaptable and also being forgiving when you can't be perfect. Like especially when you hold yourself to a high standard. And I think with high performers, that's a big piece of it, where a lot of times it's all in or all out. And when the all in is in, that's great. But with health, you can't afford that.
Yeah. How do you overcome that all in or all out?
So I've got another client who really struggled with that for a long time. And, we'd worked together in person, and he came back around about 6 months ago and wanted to ramp things up in online. And he realized that even though he knew a lot, even though he knew many of the things to do, he wasn't able to get there on his own. And many times what has to unfortunately happen is people almost have to have a humbling moment. They step in front of the mirror and they see something that's really, really off-putting to them, right? They go to the doctor and have blood work that really throws them back. I had it's crazy. Sometimes what it is, it's like you have to have a trigger or a pain point that says, you know what, like I need to move away from this line of thinking that I have and move towards the action steps that I need to do. And if that means I can't be perfect all the time, well, then I need help in order to get so. For lack of a better term, most times what gets people unstuck with that is coaching.
Yeah. I think with that trigger point, what I found more recently is people's superficial trigger point. There's a superficial trigger point and there's a real trigger point. One trigger point may be, I see myself in the mirror, which for some people may be their ultimate one, but for some it may be not enough. Then something else happens which completely compels them into action. I often find that first trigger point often isn't enough to make someone go all in, and they're still sort of skirting around thinking they're doing it, but they're not really doing it until they have the moment that it happens. And for some people, we have people who join RNT that may not have, they join and they may have had a trigger moment to get them to join, but it's not enough to make them do all the work. Whereas 2 months later, that trigger point, suddenly another one happens, and that's the one that makes them do the work. And I think if you're listening and wondering, wondering if you've got what it takes to take action, I think sometimes you've got to wait for that moment where it all clicks together and it becomes a necessity for you to change.
Yeah. And sometimes I think what happens too is some people don't hit that final trigger point until they're actually in a program, or they're actually, starting to see the rewards for what they're doing. I had a conversation, with one of our clients, and she was beating herself up a little bit. She's starting a new business, and she's moving all at the same time. And she's like, I haven't hit all my workouts. I haven't been perfect in these areas. And I was making such great progress for the previous 8 weeks. And I look at her and I say, hey, take a look at this though. You've kept up with your daily walks. Your nutrition has still been on point. You're not using alcohol as a stress coping mechanism between all these things going on, where in the past, these are the things that you would have done. And she'll look back at me and she's like, I've never thought of it that way. And in many cases, like the breakthroughs like this was like, she wasn't quite aware of some of the self-sabotaging behaviors and things that were going on in her life previously. And as a result, right, like bringing that to awareness itself is incredibly motivating and liberating, especially when you start to see that you're making incredible progress on those specific habits. And, from this point going forward, like she's crushing it, right? Everything else is more dialed in. She's got that commitment, and she really sees, the value in taking care of her health.
So Eric, as a final sentiment for those, this is, got New Year's coming around the corner. For those who are thinking about their fitness goals for 2023, what's the one thing they need to start thinking about in the next couple of weeks over Christmas if they really want to make 2023 a success?
Yeah, I mean, stop thinking about how you're going to start in 2023 and starting now, because the longer that you wait, like, you're just reinforcing procrastination. And ask yourself, like, how has reinforcing procrastination helped you in any other area of your life? It probably hasn't. In most cases, you're going to do better by jumping in, starting to make progress. And even if you're not perfect, you're going to be the person who prevents maybe that holiday weight gain, who starts to build a little bit of momentum, who feels more confident in themselves by the time that 23 comes around, or 2023 does come around. Hey, you're going to be ready to, go even harder and see even quicker results. Because, if you've got that spring vacation that you're already thinking about right now, it's going to come up a little bit quicker than you think. It always does every single year. It happens to me too. So, the point is, you want to start now.
Absolutely. Where can people find out more about some of the work that you're putting out there, Eric? You're always producing great articles. Where can people read some more and follow along the journey?
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. Yeah. So 2 places. One, my website, bachperformance.com. We have regular articles coming up there. And then easiest social media platform is going to be Instagram. So at Bach Performance, always available for chat in the DM. If you have any questions on anything that we're chatting about here or anything at all, please just reach out. I'll be more than happy to help you.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on, Eric.
All right. Thank you, brother. I'll catch you soon.